The way that worked was that was on my radio show. And you notice there was sort of two parts to the interview. And the reason why is because we have to break uh, on the hour at the 12-minute mark, at the 27-minute mark, and then we can play with the last one, but usually around the 45 or 46-second mark. If we go over the 12-minute mark, we have to do what's called double breaking, where we have to like save up all of our breaks towards the end of an hour or half-hour mark. We'll do it on occasion, but we don't like it because when you double break, people tune out because your breaks end up being like 7 minutes long. It's just not good for your show. We've double braked for broken or whatever the word is for guests before. We've never double broken twice. We double broke twice on that show just to make sure we could get everything in, and even then that wasn't enough. There was a bunch of stuff he was saying due to clock restrictions. There was a lot of things I would have loved to have interjected on, and I just did not get a chance. So to answer the second part first, there's a lot of stuff I just did not have time to get to. So I had said to my producer, what are like 3 or 4, maybe 5 essential questions, like no matter what, we got to get these in. Those I got in, but there was a bunch of stuff he raised like in real time. Like we wasted a bunch of time on managerial duties and lawyer stuff that, in retrospect, I would have loved to have gone a different direction, but I was hampered for time. So, one of the benefits of being on a radio is that you're live. One of the downsides is that you have to manage that clock, and that can often impede with the way you want to do things. So that was how I'd answer that. Now, how did I stay so calm? Very easily. I know I had a lot of people being like, "How did you stay so calm? I wanted to go crazy." I did not. I did not want to go crazy. I want to take a step back on this one. If you were paying attention, and I picked this up right away when he started talking, there's a bunch of different attitudes you can take to an interview. You have to ask yourself, how is the subject going to be when we talk? And what do you want out of it? And what's the best way to get from there to there? So here's my attitude. My attitude was I wanted him to answer straightforward questions. What are your qualifications to manage? How can it be that you can do all of these services by being only one person when most people have that diversified among people who have specialization, whether it's cornermen, coaches, trainers, managers, you name it, things like that, right? Straightforward questions about how he operates, what his qualifications are, what his theories of cornering might be. And everything else was kind of a bonus. So that was my main objective. And I had noticed I'd seen online some stuff about it, but really what I had picked up on when the minute he started talking was that he was very pissed off. Not so much at me, but at the MMA community. And I thought, well, there's a couple of ways you can get to somewhere else. You have to decide what is the best approach to get what you want. A lot of people want to go just fire and brimstone all the time. That might be valuable in certain circumstances. Like, give you an example, it's a fictional one, but it's sort of illustrative. A Few Good Men, where you had Tom Cruise as the lawyer, I forget his name, and then you had Colonel Nathan Jessup, the Marine, who had told people to abuse this guy in the name of hazing, and then they all tried to cover it up. To get him to admit to it, you had to like browbeat this guy and kind of trick him a little bit and like really, bang your fist down and demand righteous justice. He had to be kind of pulled into it. It was immediately obvious to me that this guy was, one, very angry, and two, he did not need to be pulled anything. In fact, what he wanted to do was just talk. So I thought, I have to corral this so that he doesn't ramble and go on directions that we don't need to go into, like getting after Jackson Wink. There's a conversation to be had about Jackson Wink, but that was not the time. And then the other thing I thought was, you have to make sure that you, in the spots that are important, make sure you get as much clarification as possible. But I didn't feel like I needed to browbeat him. Remember, they had to convince Colonel Nathan Jessup to acknowledge he had ordered the code red. What if instead he was just perfectly willing to volunteer that information? Would you need to go there and fire and brimstone down? You wouldn't. You just have to let him talk. So that was my approach. My approach was, let's see how he feels. Let's see what he's up to. He was ready to talk. He was ready to say how he felt. And I wanted to press him where I thought it was important to get as much clarification as possible. But when he was insulting DC and Joe Rogan and Jackson Wink, I got to tell you, I didn't feel anything. It didn't bother me. I mean, it's not that I agree with it per se. It's just I was so focused on what needed to be said from my vantage point, what needed to be corralled and contained, and how we had to steer. I didn't. It was in one ear out the other. That stuff. I really, honest to God, and also, like, if you maintain a neutral or semi-neutral mental posture, like, what is your attitude here? I'm merely looking to get answers to basic questions, and then to let this guy have an opportunity to say his piece. Him having a lot to say is not an impediment to what your objective is. If you were watching and you are not liking what he was saying, well, then there was probably a lot that pissed you off with that stuff, right? I mean, so you're coming at it from a different position. I was coming at it with, I got this thing in real time that I have to do. Here are the parameters in which I'm trying to define this interaction. Here are my goals. How is the subject coming to me? You know, is he upset? Is he reserved? Does he not want to say anything? Does he want to say anything? But when people are ready to just volunteer information, let them volunteer it. There are some rules about that in terms of like platforming people, and then again, you got to press them where it matters. But in general, I feel like I did what I was mostly supposed to. He wanted to get his word out there. That's part of what an interview is about, right? Both sides need to feel like they got something out of it. On the other hand, I don't feel like what he said was especially exonerating. In fact, I think it was quite the opposite. For a video of mine to have around 80,000 views, which it has right now, the typical comment count is around 500 to 600. We're currently bordering on 3,200 for him. So it's about 6 times the normal rate. And if you look at the comments, and I think the general feedback in which I've gotten, I don't think a lot of you found his answers particularly convincing as well. And it wasn't because he didn't have an opportunity to clarify. He did have an opportunity to clarify. I just don't think he either knows how to or he can't, or again, I don't know. But if you are asked a series of straightforward questions, what are your qualifications? And your answers hinge on things like, I didn't know we needed certain signposts to get to the place we're going. You know, that's not the answers that you need to be given, especially if you're cornering somebody in a fight where they have a lot to lose. And a lot to gain, but a lot to lose. So the answer is just decide, if you're doing interviews, decide where you need to end up. How do you get there? What is the subject giving you? And then form a strategy. Have one in advance. Have one ready to accommodate in real time as well. Pretty straightforward. Again, I was just focused on my objective. I did not want that to be over. And if I could get bonus, that'd be great. But the basic questions I wanted at least attempted to answer, things about magic on his website and stuff like that. I got to all of that. I got to the core of what I wanted. So, is yelling at him going to get me there? Don't think so. Is being super full of righteous indignation going to get me there? No. I mean, I wasn't doing an act per se, but I was calm, professional, and then maintained this to get to a space where somebody feels like they had their say, and so do you and me. And I think I did. Again, not in totality, but in parts that I needed to. The only part that was hard about keeping it together was there were so many spots where I wanted to like stop it and be like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And there was just no time. That's the only real hard part. That was the part I was like, I just couldn't give any more. We were just out of airtime. We could not double break a third time. That would be, I've never even heard of something like that. We didn't even do that for Mayweather-McGregor stuff. So after speaking with him, I would say the following. Here is my hunch of things. First of all, it's kind of interesting. The week began with, did Diego quit? Is he a quitter? And everyone's got their own debate about it. I tend to think he quite obviously decided he'd had enough. But given that promoters have been sticking it to fighters all these years, splitting their purses up between show and win, and that he's going through a divorce, and you have a financial incentive to just say fine. It's hard for me to get really upset about it. Plus, he's been such a blood and guts fighter for so long. If this happens again, well, that's different. But for the one time, I have a hard time holding it against Diego. It's interesting now that at the end of the week, that conversation has all but gone away. Now the conversation has shifted entirely to his coach. No one is really talking about, did Diego quit, did he not quit? Everything is about what role is the coach playing in his life. Now, I don't know if that was intentional on the part of Fabia. I don't know if that was a goal, like I'm going to take the heat off Diego by going and doing a media tour. Maybe, maybe not, but either way, it has had that practical effect. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that he came off, to me, this is my opinion, terribly unconvincing. Terribly unconvincing. I think that one thing that MMA suffers from is credentialism, where it's like, you can't say anything unless you fought in the cage. You can't say anything unless you're a black belt. You can't say anything unless you've done X, Y, and Z. And to the point where they're trying to wall off conversation, not to keep out frauds, although it can have that effect, but rather to eliminate the ability to receive criticism, even fair, from people who have not done the same exact tasks as you. Right? You feel like they're unqualified because they haven't gone there, but it actually doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's simply a way to avoid criticism. Now, I make videos time to time trying to break down technique, but I have to tell you, I'm very, very careful about them. There are things I know a little bit about. I know a little bit about leg locks, but typically if a fight goes in that direction, unless I really kind of have to talk about it, I don't. Because more often than not, there's not enough that I know about that. It was never a big part of my training. I did a little bit of it, but when I say a little bit of it, a few months, but that's not much. It's very little, actually. So I'm just not qualified to say a whole lot about it. And at the beginning of my videos, I always give you the same disclaimer. Some people are like, why are you giving the disclaimer? This is why I'm giving you the disclaimer. I always say, I do not present this to you to be the only analysis, the best, or the most complete. Seek out what other analysts have to say. That's on purpose, so you can cross-reference it. Then I try to build around it an evidentiary weight. I make a series of claims, and then I show you evidence for it. Right? People are like, how do you know what you're saying is true? Dude, I'm literally showing you the evidence for it. Now, you can say that evidence doesn't justify the claims. There could be a divide there, but I'm trying to show you everything from an evidentiary standpoint because they want to eliminate people from having a say and participation in martial arts. Fine. But even with all that, and I've got about a decade in the gym. People always ask me, what's my training experience? About a decade in the gym, okay? A long time. And I don't feel even remotely qualified to corner an amateur fighter in his fight, much less a UFC one. Even just making videos, and the only cost there is like, if I get it wrong, I look bad in the end. Sorry, it's been a long day. That's different than the weight of having to train somebody and get them ready and then corner them. That is an awesome responsibility, dude. Can you imagine if someone's getting their ass kicked and they come back to you between rounds and they're looking at you and saying, what do I do? Dude, you better fucking know the answer. Or at least have a good idea, right? And even then, coaches are going to get it wrong. They're going to get it right. But somebody who's been there, somebody who knows, somebody who understands this a little bit, someone who can motivate you. Now, maybe he can do that. I don't know. But I found his answers about the basic mechanics of what he needs to do and what makes him qualified to do it woefully lacking. Did not find it convincing at all. To me, there is a lot that was wrong there. If you look at his website, there are some stuff, as I mentioned in the interview, that are totally innocuous. Hey, here's fat loss stuff. Here's connective tissue strengthening. Here's muscle growth. And even some of that stuff about meditation and whatnot, there appears to be some scientific validity to it. It's not for me, but I can imagine someone like Diego might thrive from that, and that's fine. But there's also a ton of stuff on there about magic, quite literally the words magic, about the transference of energy between spiritual beings, a bunch of stuff that has very little scientific validity. And when I asked what the proof was for it in the interview, I could not get a straight answer about it. I mean, if you don't have a straight answer about basic questions in general, there's going to be a problem there over time, especially when you are tasked with something with as much gravity as training a guy and getting him ready for a professional fist fight, where there are grave consequences if you don't get that correct. So that's my general view. If you're asking what the connectivity is between he and Diego, this is my read on it. Again, this is my opinion. I could be wrong. But Diego had a falling out with Jackson Wink, and I don't know who's in the right there. Maybe Jackson Wink was in the right because they're like, dude, we can't do anything for you anymore. And maybe he feels like he's not done. He wants someone to do that for him. So he had this falling out where it was centered around a lack of attention, a lack of care, right? That's his way of putting it anyway. Whether that's true, decide for yourself. But that's how he frames it. He's also going through this divorce. Well, here comes this guy who, it feels like to me, he put his arm around Diego, metaphorically speaking, at a time when Diego really needed someone to put an arm around him. Right? I mean, if you're the children of divorced parents, maybe your kids, or sorry, maybe your parents got along amicably. Dude, for me, my parents did not. And I've seen divorces in terms of other couples just absolutely break people. It's expensive. Your life gets turned upside down. You know, and Diego's had a series of like these peaks and then these troughs and then these peaks and then these troughs. And I think Diego was at a bit of a trough and a crossroads, frankly, in his professional career. And here came a guy who was willing to put his arm around him. And you know what? I don't think that's nothing. I don't think that's nothing. I really, really don't. I whether or not he's in a position to do those other things is an important question, and it's one where I'm answering forthrightly. I don't think he's in a position to do those other things. But everyone's like, oh, he's brainwashing Diego. Well, Diego is also a guy who got hooked up with Dan Quinn and thought stevia could cure cancer. I had him on my radio show, and Diego said oxygenated and alkaline water, I referenced it in the interview, could either, I think it was either help prevent or, reverse the effects of CTE, one of the two. He is often gullible and not scientifically particularly discerning with these kinds of things. And I don't think, in my opinion, Joshua Fabia is either. But the point being is, Diego's going through this incredibly difficult time in his life, and a guy came around who was willing to be there for him, I think emotionally, and I can understand why that could create a powerful bond. In the end, though, that powerful bond does not give you license to corner a guy when doing so, at least solo, is completely out of your depth. I recognize that there is a credentialism in MMA where if you don't have these super high-level credentials, you get excluded from conversations, and that's not fair. You always have to take seriously the possibility that there could be something to his methods. Everybody kind of goofed on movement training with Conor McGregor, and it turns out there was a little bit something to it. Yes, part of it was silly, of course, but part of it was kind of real too, and I think showed itself in the end a little bit. So you have to have a bit of an open mind, but if I'm asking you a series of basic questions related to an obligation you have to another human being's health and safety, and all the answers I get are essentially non-answers, we have a problem here. Right? We have a problem here. I mean, think about it. Gordon Ryan, I think, competes either tonight or this weekend at Substars. He's going up against Tex Johnson. If I had to ask you about Gordon Ryan and his training background, what would you be able to tell me? Just based off what you know today. A lot, right? You'd be able to know he got his black belt, I think, under Tom DeBlass or Gary Tonin, one of the two. He trains with Gary Tonin and Tom DeBlass and John Danaher, and they come from the Renzo Gracie system. He has won X awards. He is typically known now for his turtle and back attacks, previously part of the Danaher Death Squad and the leg lock system, blah, 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 blah. Went double gold at ADCC. You could tell me a lot. You could tell me a lot. What can you tell me about Fabia's, who trained him? What credentials does he have? He relies on this idea that there's a bunch of videos out there that are exonerating of him. I watch the videos and I come away not even knowing what I'm supposed to be looking at. Now, I've had teachers like him who, they didn't bring out knives in the octagon at the Performance Institute like apparently Emil Weber Mech said. No, not that crazy. But I've had ones where it's like, okay, in this jiu-jitsu school, we're going to learn, today we're going to learn self-defense, street defense. Like, here's what you're going to do in the case of a street. And like every other school is like learning barambolos and, how to sink the hooks on a person who, after a chair sit and stuff like that. And they didn't do that. So, okay, some people have unorthodox methods. I cannot speak to the totality of Joshua Fabia's training repertoire. And I think that people are not understanding the role that this guy, I think, is playing in Diego's life at a very pivotal time. And Diego does have some culpability about his lack of discernment from people's expertise. On the other hand, when it comes to the basic question of, why are you the guy who's qualified to be the only one in his corner? And I remember even when I asked him about giving corner advice, he's like, it's all muscle memory. What am I going to say to this grand fighter? It's like, holy shit, dude, these are all the wrong things to say. And we know that from the weight of experience over and over and over and over again. He asked, how do you know wrestling works? Well, dude, we got thousands of years of experience. That's how we know. right? These are sort of silly questions to be asking about things. So I think there are parts to who he is that are genuine in terms of the value he provides to Diego. I think the credentialism in MMA is a little bit too. It's not really about your credentials sometimes. It's just about excluding people from the conversation. And I think we've often mocked unusual training methods and then come to find out later on there could be some value to them. On those levels, I don't really have a lot to say negatively about Fabia's work. But on the core foundational stuff as it relates to his occupation and his belonging there and his ability to do those jobs in an effective way, I did not come away convinced. And I don't think hardly any of you did either. And the reason is pretty obvious. You had 45 minutes to answer straightforward questions, and I didn't get a straightforward answer. That's about as simple as that. I don't know what the purpose would be of speaking to Fabia again unless there were dramatic changes to what had happened in his life and unless he was more forthright in discussing some of the things that I felt I did not get straightforward answers to. I think that's the first. The second thing I would say is again, it depends what you want out of an interview. I wanted to him, he felt like the MMA community was pushing back against him. So I felt like keeping that up would not be productive for the purposes of getting more information. So while I wanted to let him speak, and I think I did that. I think I gave him an opportunity to speak. On the other hand, what I wanted to see was I can't let him just say whatever he wants forever and then like endorse his methods. I wanted him to explain his methods. I wanted him to justify his methods. I wanted him to answer for the questions. I wanted him to tell me how he felt about things. And again, I think there are some criticisms being lobbied his way that are not fair. And I asked him about that. But I also wanted him to answer for the things that mattered the most. Because in the end, you know what this is all really about, dude? It's all really about Diego. It's like, in the end, here's what's really this comes down to. It's like, I think people really care about Diego. And I think people are just concerned. Simple as that. Financial, health, whatever, you name it. They're just concerned about Diego, dude. That's really all this comes down to. Is this dude doing right by this guy? That's it. That's all it really comes down to. And I wanted to see if he could give us some answers that assuaged some of those concerns. And I wanted him to have a chance to speak his mind. And so what would be the purpose in giving another interview there? And during the course of the interview, you have to thread this needle where you let someone say what they have to say, but you don't let them say whatever they want to say. That's a fine line there between let this person speak, but don't let them just dictate. And I was trying to, and again, I didn't get that totally right, but in general, I got most of what I wanted out of that. So between repeating, if you see someone who's like disreputable constantly, getting a platform, that's a problem. If you see a person there's questions about them, and then the interview just doesn't really ask them about it, that's a problem. But you have to speak to certain people. I think you would all agree. Fabia had a right to speak, I think there was a value in hearing him speak, and I think he had a right to speak his voice. Doesn't mean you have to agree. I didn't. But there's a value in that. You just can't let them say whatever they want. You can't let them have a repeated platform, and you can't just let them dictate the terms. So that's the answer.